Greetings, adventurers. This is Lauren, your guild advisor, and we are here for the final time to discuss my source reader impressions on the finale of DanMachi Season 4, episodes 21 through 22. What did I think of the last two episodes as a reader of the original light novels? And it goes without saying that I've been enjoying Season 4 a lot. It's easily the best adaptation of the series so far. I thought episode 20 was easily probably the best episode in the series to date. So my expectations for episodes 21 and 22 were very high, and most of them have been met. There are like some minor gripes or nitpicks or whatever you want to call that I have with the finale episode, but overall a very good job. But let's just go ahead and get into it. So starting with episode 21, we open up the scene with Belle and Ryu in that undiscovered rest area in the dungeon on 437. When they crash through the Coliseum floor, they end up in this passage and they find this spring water area with no monsters around. And the episode opens up with them already having made a fire in the area using Belle's firebolt and some of the hairs of the barbarian that Belle killed earlier in the passage to use as fire material. This is a little bit different from the light novel because this fire isn't actually made until after they have their little intimate scene with them warming each other up with their bodies, and that allows them to get a bit of rest, so Belle has enough magic power to actually start the fire with firebolt. But I'm not opposed to them starting with the fire here because it does provide a nice little atmosphere as you have this little orange glow in the area, and it contrasts against the blue of the floor itself. So it's a really nice contrast with the colors there. So I thought they looked good. And it's not that big of a deal to have Belle like use one firebolt spell to make this fire. And again, it just provides a nice little backdrop with Ryu and Belle warming themselves up, huddled together against the fire. And I do have to say, I always love it when they're just having Ryu voice her thoughts in the anime. There's a lot of the time in the novel where it's written in a third-person perspective, and from that third-person perspective, we get to see Ryu's thoughts, but they're not always exactly within her words. So it's nice to see them take advantage of Saori Hayami, Ryu's voice actress, one of the probably the best ones in the industry, my favorite, and using her talents, just have Ryu voice these thoughts. Always love that. And when it comes to the scene with Belle and Ryu obviously drying off their clothes, so they're pretty much half naked and huddled against each other. When it comes to these types of scenes, based off JC Staff's past treatment of DanMachi, like you're used to them like trying to sometimes overdo it in terms of fan service, especially when it comes to Hestia. So I was really happy and pleased that they didn't really try to push that at all within this episode. They just kind of kept the tone pretty serious for the most part. It's like, yes, these two individuals are a bit uncomfortable being half naked, but when it comes down to it, they get serious. Like when you see Belle notice that Ryu really is shivering and cold, like you see him like stop being nervous and just immediately get closer to her without hesitation to warm each other up. And when it came to reading this part of the novel for the first time, that was years ago. When did this come out? Like 3 years ago or so? The first time I read this part in the novel, I actually felt like I had to put this book down for a second because I felt like I needed to give these two people space because it was like a very intimate scene and I almost felt like I was spying on them here. So it was a very strange sensation that I felt like I had to put a book down. Like, I love the book. It's my favorite book in the entire series, but I had to put it down because I felt like I needed to give the characters some space. So I was looking forward to this scene and just seeing like the intimate moments being shared between the two. And as much as Ryu feels like she's relying on Belle here, Belle was definitely relying on her as well. Like, again, Belle is still a young boy, a bit over 14 years old. He hasn't even been an adventurer for 6 months yet, and he's been enduring all these crazy circumstances thrown at him throughout the course of the series. and he's going through this hell of floor 37, exhausted. His body is messed up in all sorts of places, especially his left arm. They have no supplies. It's probably incredibly reassuring for Bell to be able to take comfort in the warmth of someone else that's close to him, like Ryu, in these crazy circumstances, because they're pretty much experiencing the same thing. So he's able to take comfort in the fact that someone else is experiencing the same exact things as him. So again, it's just nice to see this scene between the two, being able to rest up for a bit after enduring the hell of floor 37 for as long as they have been throughout this whole second half of season 4. And one minor and subtle detail I like that they showed in the anime was when you see Bell's arm kind of shaking in a panic when Ryu is telling him that we basically do have to get back onto the dungeon because we can't stay here forever. So you do get that sense that this whole situation is wearing Bell down mentally, and he's trying to push himself through it. And as Bell and Ryu are traversing through floor 37, they notice there's not many monsters appearing in their path, so they're trying to take advantage of that. And they eventually get to the 4th ring wall and go through it. They think they're almost home free, and of course we have the appearance of Juggernaut. He is back. And I do have to say, I do like how they kind of redesigned him for this other form that's obviously taking into account all the other monsters that it has consumed to become part of its body. In the light novel, it's described a bit differently because his right arm specifically, it's supposed to be like a bunch of skull sheep skulls kind of like moving together and making sounds. And obviously, if they went with that kind of design, they pretty much have to use CG and make a CG model for that. And I appreciate the fact that they kind of redesigned the Juggernaut. And again, all in all, I do like their interpretation of the Juggernaut's chimera form in this hand-drawn style, as opposed to them trying to adapt exactly how the light novel describes the Juggernaut and having to probably settle for using a CG model. But again, I'm glad they went with a hand-drawn style for this. And it's not because I'm like off-put by CG. I know some people, like when they see CG being used in anime, they're immediately put off by it. I'm not exactly like that. But JC Staff's CG department isn't exactly like Studio Orange, who makes Land of the Lustrous, Beastars, and currently Trigun Stampede. Like, their CG is really, really well done. JC Staff's CG department's probably not up to that kind of quality. So I'm glad they stuck to just using hand-drawn animation and redesigning the Juggernaut to fit that. And when it came to the Amphisbaina, that was CG, and I think overall that was pretty well done. It was a lot better than I thought it would be coming off the first trailers for Season 4. And it feels more appropriate for Amphisbaina to be in CG when it's this huge, gigantic floor boss. And in a way kind of adds to the idea that it's this massive, otherworldly threat that the expedition party has to overcome. While as the Juggernaut is more, obviously it's smaller than the Amphisbaina, but it's also a much more personal enemy, especially for Ryu, because it's the symbol of her past. So it's a lot more fitting that Juggernaut is hand-drawn, and it just blends better into the overall style of the anime because of that. And I love how they kept the detail of Bell pointing out all the different monsters that were incorporated into the Juggernaut's body, because it feels like that's the kind of detail that they would just kind of like overlook in the past seasons, because again, like the past two seasons, seasons 2 and season 3, they only had 12 episodes each, and that was clearly not enough episodes to cover the material they were going through. So they didn't really have opportunities to keep like small details like this into those adaptations. So again, really glad they kept that in. There's a small anime addition where Ryu actually pushes Bell out of the way of one of the Juggernaut's attacks when she's trying to fight through her trauma. In the light novel, as Bell is fighting Juggernaut's chimera form, for the most part, Ryu is just kind of standing there in shock. So I'm really glad they actually kind of change that a tiny bit to have Ryu try to fight through that to at least try to save Belle, because that's very in character that Ryu cares more about Belle than her own well-being, as you saw in the episode with the Colosseum. And we have this scene where Belle gets impaled by the bone spikes as they're trying to get away from Juggernaut, and when he fire bolts his wound shut, it's oh man, I love it. Belle, yes, Belle, I love your pain. Not like that. I don't mean love it like that. I mean, I love the way it was done. Like, the voice acting, always great. Matsuoka-san, Belle's voice actor, is one of my favorite male voice actors in the industry. Always does a great job with Belle. Really sold how painful that was, as well as the animation, like showing like Belle's eyes kind of like light up in pain. They did a good job with that. I mentioned in the cuts and changes video that directly after Belle closes his wound with Firebolt, he's actually using Firebolt at the ground to create a kind of smoke screen, and then another Firebolt towards the Juggernaut to distract it while Ryu and Belle create space to get away from it. But in the anime, they just kind of take that out altogether, and I did not mind that change because when you think about it, like, Belle just got like stabbed straight through the stomach, used Firebolt on his own body to close the wound. It makes sense that Belle is going to be out of it for a tiny bit and not be able to use Firebolt at the ground and aim one at Juggernaut. So I did not mind that change at all. But then we do get to that segment where Ryu has to dive into that small passage with Belle that Juggernaut can't get into because it's too big. And there are monsters hiding in there because they're all afraid of Juggernaut about to be feasting on them. And the Juggernaut kills those monsters in Belle and Ryu's path as it tries to kill them. And during this, I mentioned that always in the light novel, when monsters die, they always leave behind corpses and guts and blood all over the place. Unless the magic stone itself gets destroyed, then that means the monster just kind of turns into ash, and any drop items will drop as well. In the anime, monsters always turn into ash, so you're not going to see monster guts everywhere and blood painting a scene. So I mentioned that in the cuts and changes video, where it had a very graphic description of the area that Belle and Ryu were lying in. Because as you see in the anime, Belle and Ryu kind of like dive straight through the monsters and drop to the ground as Juggernaut kills the monsters. And what happens in the light novel is that when those monsters are killed, their blood and guts gets everywhere all around them, and they're also covered in the guts and blood themselves. So the novel describes the entire scene that Belle and Ryu are in as looking like a fresh murder scene. But of course, this isn't even like a case of like censoring the anime because they think that's too much blood. It's just simply them keeping consistent with the rules they made for the anime from like season 1. Like, monsters always turn into ash. And that was an unfortunate result of that rule, because it would have been quite the scene to see them get painted in blood and guts. And in regards to the scene with Belle and Ryu just lying on the ground, lying to each other about them being safe and out of reach from the Juggernaut and how the Juggernaut gave up on them, I love how absolutely tragic that scene feels, where both of these people know that they're lying to each other to make each other feel better, but the Juggernaut is absolutely still waiting for them. And then we have Ryu letting herself believe in that lie and ask Belle to watch over her as she rests. And while Belle tricks her into thinking that he's given up already as well. But of course, we know that our boy Belle has not quite given up yet. And that brings us into episode 22, the finale. So at the very beginning of this episode, I thought they might have opened up with Belle kind of recounting the tale of Belius the Guard. I mentioned this in the cuts and changes video as well. It's like a few sentences too. How basically Belius the Guard was this knight that protected this elf of the lake, and he ended up dying in her arms because of his devotion to her. And Belle was just trying to channel that strength. And they do mention this later on in the episode when Ryu talks about it, Though I feel like it almost seems like a random line for Ryu to say because there's no initial context from when Bell references it earlier, like in the light novel. But it's not that big of a deal. I just found it strange that they had Ryu mention this line without that build up from Bell thinking about this story in the beginning of the scene, like in the light novel. One addition the anime made that I liked in this episode was during the scene with Ryu and Estrella Familia talking to each other, they actually had all the members of Estrella Familia have some lines to say to Ryu as opposed to the light novel, which really just has the prominent members, Kaguya, Lyra, and Elise talk to Ryu. So because they gave lines to all the members of Estrella Familia, it makes that final sequence against Juggernaut hit that much harder emotionally because you see all of them during that segment too. And one quick scene in the anime I wanted to mention really quickly is when Bell challenges the Juggernaut and he like straight up says to the Juggernaut, "I will kill you, and then I will go back home with Ryu." Like Metal Bell declaring his intentions straight up to this monstrosity in front of him. But when it comes to the fight overall against the Juggernaut, when I first reviewed this novel years ago when it came out, I pointed out that I loved the fact that it was Ryu who got to deal the finishing blow against Juggernaut instead of Bell, because this arc is very much about Ryu and how she overcomes her past by getting support from Bell. But Bell isn't the person that ultimately saves her. Like, he provides support to her, like reassures that she does have justice in her. But this is something that Ryu mentions in the Estrella Familia scene when she's talking to them. But the one person that needed to forgive Ryu was herself, because she knew that no matter what, the Estrella Familia members would never blame her for their deaths. It was Ryu all along that had to forgive herself for what happened all those years ago. And the only way for Ryu to truly get that closure is for herself to defeat Juggernaut, like the symbol of her past, to do what she could not do all those years ago as a way of redemption, a way of getting true closure to what happened all those years ago. So I'm so happy that Ryu is the one that deals the finishing blow against Juggernaut, and it's not Bell, because I feel like if this was maybe like a different series, I'm not saying like, yo, DanMachi's the first series to have a female character stand up for herself. I'm not saying that. But I do feel like in a lot of other series, Ryu would remain the damsel in distress, and Bell would just be the one to defeat Juggernaut himself. Like Ryu says to Bell here, she was not one to just stand to the side as someone protects her. Like, Ryu is a very powerful adventurer in her own right, and Bell even mentions that she is like a hero to him, so it makes so much sense that Ryu is the one to deal this finishing blow, fighting side by side with Bell as she overcomes her past with his support. I just love that aspect of this so much. So when it comes to the actual fight itself, I will admit that my expectations for it were pretty high, especially coming off of episode 20, which I was not expecting to be as high quality as it was, because they like did everything for episode 20. They skipped the opening visuals, they skipped the ED visuals, they like maximized the amount of screen time that the episode could have, and there's like so many good sequences throughout that entire episode. Like they went above and beyond for episode 20, so my expectations were super high for this final fight, because this is, of course, the finale to Season 4. Now, I do want to say that I was a little, like, this is a nitpick right now, because overall the episode, very good. So this is a nitpick that I'm about to say, but I kind of felt like the fight was kind of short. Now, to be fair, Bell and Ryu have been fighting Juggernaut, like, across Season 4 itself, like the end of the first half of the season, ran away from Juggernaut at the beginning of the second half, and then fought it a bit in episode 21, and then here in episode 22. So they have been fighting Juggernaut for quite a while. It's not like they met at one time and then killed it in 5 minutes. But at the same time, it still did kind of feel like the fight was kind of short here, and I really wish they were able to cut the opening visuals like they did for episode 20 for this episode, because that would have given them another minute and a half to kind of work with, which I think would have been this would have been a good way to use that minute and a half just to make the fights a bit longer. And in the light novel, the final fight here is also somewhat short. The thing that kind of makes the fight longer in the light novel is that it explicitly says that Ryu and Bell have been kind of fighting the Juggernaut for about 5 minutes, and that's like kind of the exact sentence. It's been about 5 minutes since the battle began, is what the light novel says. But at the same time, that kind of gives the animators, like, if they have the time, like, I don't know, again, I say this all the time, I don't know what the production schedule is for this show. Like, I don't know if they were like working on time restrictions, like animators kind of always are in this industry. There's always like crazy time restrictions. And in general, I'm glad that DanMachi has not had like any delays whatsoever, because there are other animes that were airing this season that have had delays, like due to various circumstances. And DanMachi is not one of those that suffered that. So I'm really happy in that regard. And when you look ahead at JC Staff's schedule, I think they're working on 2 or 3 anime next season. So I imagine there's a transition period of people like moving off of DanMachi and onto other projects. So again, I don't know what the production schedule is. Maybe they didn't have enough time or resources to like use that minute and a half and add a bit more to the fight. But I said this for the Moss Huge fight in episode 5. That like one thing that really stuck out to me, like I was not expecting the Moss Huge fight to impress me as much as it did in the anime, because it kind of felt like to me it felt like one of those things they would just kind of get over with quickly, but they kind of went above and beyond what I expected, because they got pretty creative with some of the sequences in that fight, because I wasn't expecting to see Bell like running across the walls to avoid attacks. Like, that was super hype and something not in the novels. So it kind of felt like if they had an extra minute and a half to work with, they could also get creative with the fight against the Juggernaut. But I imagine that animating Juggernaut is still extremely difficult because of how detailed that model is. Like, there's a lot of detail to Juggernaut, and I do not envy the animators that had to work with trying to animate that monstrosity and Bell and Ryu fighting against it. But other than the Juggernaut fight not lasting quite as long as I would like, the thing I mentioned in Cuts and Changes video is that the way that Ryu uses her magic to like kind of get closer and closer to the Juggernaut through the air is a bit different between the light novel and the anime. In the anime, Ryu is kind of, it looks like she's using her magic to actually float up in the air. Ryu can't actually do that in the light novel. It's not like her magic just lets her float up and fly. In the light novel, basically Ryu is using the luminous wind orbs to like, she detonates them at the bottom of her feet to basically launch herself through the air. So I kind of understand why they did not choose to go with that approach in terms of animation, because it would probably end up being like this like 2 or 3 minutes like Attack on Titan 3D maneuver gear kind of scene, where Ryu is blasting herself all across the room, chasing after Juggernaut, changing directions by blasting herself on the side. Because I mentioned also in the Cuts and Changes video that one of the orbs she uses to detonate and push her body to change directions fractures her left arm. So the light novel and anime versions of this final sequence is pretty different, and it kind of took me like a second watch of this sequence to turn off my mind from expecting what I imagined when reading the novel and just trying to taking in what the anime did. And one thing I liked with the anime versions of that final sequence is how they decided to incorporate the visuals of the Estrella Familia members into it, because in the novel, like, it kind of mentions that Ryu is kind of imagining these orbs as her Familia members, but what the anime does is actually like straight up have these orbs become those Familia members. Of course, this is something that's only in Ryu's mind. What the Juggernaut and Bell see are just the orbs. It's not like the Familia members just suddenly become spirits and are attacking Juggernaut with Ryu. This is all in her head, but I like how it was visualized in the anime, and that's the thing that makes up for the fact that the anime's approach to this final sequence is not quite as like dynamic in terms of movement as the light novel version, because I really enjoyed that like final sequence where we have Kaguya go in and take out the rest of the right arm of the Juggernaut. Then you have Lyra like actually push Ryu down as she starts diving towards Juggernaut, and of course Elise having Ryu hold her hand as they're both diving together. And you know, funnily enough, when I read this sequence the first time in the light novel, I did not think about the Rasengan at all in when reading it. Like Rasengan never crossed my mind, and I like Naruto a lot, but when I watched the final episode here and then look at some of the comments on discussion threads about the episode, people are talking about how it was basically like a Rasengan attack. I'm like, you know, it does kind of look like that, I guess. But again, that never crossed my mind when watching or when reading this for the first time. But kind of cool. Ryu's green Rasengan used to defeat the Juggernaut. And then after Bell and Ryu defeat Juggernaut, we have them like both collapsed on the floor, exhausted, their bodies like pretty much broken and unable to move. They won the battle, but they kind of lost the war against the dungeon itself because they're not able to move at all. And now that Juggernaut was gone, that means the monsters that were initially like hiding in fear can now come out and basically take Bell and Ryu out because they're way too exhausted to do anything. And again, this is another one of those like super tragic and bittersweet moments where Ryu and Bell are right by each other and they're like trying to comfort each other in lies they know aren't true by saying like, oh, we can go back home now. But they know in the back of their head that they're kind of screwed. And then of course that's when we have the Xenos and the expedition crew finally find Bell and Ryu. And something I kind of liked here is that because in the light novel, what you have there is Bell and Ryu like kind of almost blacking out, and then they hear like the Xenos come into the room and start talking. And then Ryu gets lifted up by Fia, the harpy, and she looks at Bell and says they can go home. End chapter, new chapter, Ryu wakes up in the clinic. And then what you have here is with the anime, they actually extend the scene a bit and actually show the expedition crew and the waitresses reunite with Bell and Ryu. So I thought that was a nice little touch they did with the anime. And then when we do get to the clinic, this is a very small moment for a character that does not have much screen time. And that's of course the healer that's operating or checking up on Bell's arm, Amid of Diankecht Familia. You probably aren't familiar with Amid if you've never seen, I believe, like season 3's OVA, or if you have not seen Sword Oratoria, because she appears there as well. But best healer in Horario, and that's who's taking care of Bell. And I love that little short moment she has where she's scolding Hestia and Lily for slapping the crap out of Bell when he sees Ryu. Like, what are you doing to my patient? And then we have Hestia Familia go ahead and thank Ryu for helping Bell on 437. And they actually have Welf spill the beans that Gale Wind was officially declared dead by the guild, courtesy of Boars for being a homie, but also expecting some payment from the guild for the bounty. And that Gale Wind was also being acknowledged as one of the heroes from the Black Goliath fight in Season 1. The thing is, it was actually Aisha that says this to Ryu, that relays this information. I think they just had Welf say this info so they didn't have to draw another scene with Aisha talking to Ryu instead. So they're just trying to kill two birds with one stone, I guess, in that regard. It did show Aisha like kind of sitting outside the room. So it's still having Aisha involved in this scene somewhat, like she is there, she's just not saying this information to Ryu like in the light novel. And then we have Bell and Ryu taking their walk, like almost kind of like a date-like scenario. I kind of wish they kept how the light novel introduced this scene, because what was supposed to happen is that both Bell and Ryu are supposed to be like taking their first steps out into the city together, because again, they were kind of blacked out when they were found on 437, and then when they both wake up, they're in that clinic. And so when they're discharged, they actually like step out of the clinic and into the city together. So I kind of wish that kind of was kept in the anime, because I just think that has more of an emotional impact seeing them do that together rather than just like doing a little setup like they had like a prearranged meeting spot like they were on a date. Though the shipper in me likes the whole date idea, but again, I think I still would have preferred the original way of how it was done. And regarding the end of the episode, it's an interesting contrast to think that season 3 kind of ended in a similar fashion, where you have Eyes and Bell with the aftermath of the Asterius fight and the Xenos going back into the dungeon. Eyes and Bell are overlooking Auraria from a city wall, and then here at the end of season 4 we have Bell and Ryu overlooking some view that's important to Ryu because Elise took her there a lot. And me being the big Ryu fan I love seeing her in that dress and that beautiful smile and how she's reacting to Bell. And now that Ryu is free from her past, she can truly smile beautifully without worries. And at the very end right there, I was actually like slightly worried that they weren't going to adapt Elise's line where she basically says to not let Bell get away from her when Ryu is confused about her feelings and wondering what she should do. Yeah, I almost felt like they kind of drew that pause out as a little fake out to light novel readers or something, because it felt like a long time before they had Elise say that line. And I'm so glad they kept the line in, because I feel like if they didn't keep that line in and just had the anime end with Ryu running away from Bell, it might make people think that like no progress whatsoever was going to happen between like those two, or at least Ryu trying to acknowledge her feelings. But since they kept that line in where Elise says that, like, okay, maybe that little push is what Ryu needs to hear. And remember, Elise's dead. Elise's not actually talking to Ryu. This is what Ryu thinks that Elise would say to her. So subconsciously, this is something that Ryu actually wants to hear. But yeah, that's enough shipping analysis. Like overall, great episode. Again, I had some minor gripes, but if I'm grading this episode on a scale of 10 out of 10, with episode 20 being my 10 out of 10 for basically being a perfect adaptation, then this one's probably a 9 out of 10 at worst. But overall, guys, like this whole journey through season 4, absolutely, it's crazy, because I don't know if how many people have kept up with my videos over the course of the years, but I don't remember if I actually said this out loud or not. But after season 3, I was talking about how when season 4 was announced, I think I like straight up said, or at least thought, that like since the content that season 4 covers is my favorite arc in the entire series, if it was going to be treated the same way that seasons 2 and 3 were, like as rushed adaptations, I would rather they not adapt it at all. And I am so happy that they put like the proper attention and care into season 4. They gave it a proper amount of episodes for the material it's covering. Like I'm so happy I was wrong about my my pessimism there. Like I'm so happy that this is what we got instead. I'm so happy. Like easily the best season by far. And I think the ratings support that as well. So that just makes me really happy that like the people that stuck around through seasons 2 and 3, which I thought had mediocre at best adaptations, like this is your reward. Season 4, it's great. I loved it. Like there are like some gripes I have with this season, of course, like I mentioned them. They made Bell seem kind of clueless in the anime compared to his light novel version when confronting Jura. Like some of the portrayals of Juggernaut's speed in the first half of the show wasn't necessarily the best. And sometimes I felt like they weren't like providing enough focus on specific parts of the fight, particularly when Bell damages like one of the reverse knee joints, which takes out some of the Juggernaut's mobility. But they don't really like focus on that for some reason, which I thought was weird. And it's the same thing with the right arm. Like, I'm glad they pointed out the right arm in the second half, where Bell like sees Juggernaut's new Chimera arm, and Bell's like, wait a second, I took that out, what's going on here? And on the reverse, episode 20's rendition of a Juggernaut fight was much better in that regard. Like, you could see the sense of speed the Juggernaut had in that episode. Another con of season 4's adaptation was kind of just like dropping the ball in general when it comes to Cassandra's characterization. Like, it was very strange, because it felt like anytime that Cassandra would have a scene in the anime, they would like really make her look bad, which was so weird to me. And of course, the thing that sticks out with Cassandra in the anime is when she's just kind of standing there in fear as the Amphisbaena is about to use that breath attack on her. And that does not happen in the light novel, because what originally happened was Amphisbaena does that tsunami, and then what happens is Cassandra is supposed to be shielding both Haruhime and Lily with her body, because one of the chunks of ice is coming at them and it hits her back. And that's why Cassandra can't get up and move away from the breath attack, is because she just took a huge chunk of ice to the back. And that's why Haruhime has to push her out of the way. But they don't do that at all and just kind of make Cassandra look pathetic. And then again, there's the whole thing with Welf's backstory not being mentioned, but that's more of a knock on season 2 for not doing it in the first place. Because when Welf is making his new unbreakable magic sword, he's thinking about his family in Rakia, and also having context about his confession to Hephaestus helps understanding this scene as well. But season 2 skipped out on adapting both of those things, so it kind of hurts that scene in terms of emotional impact, which is unfortunate. And I think part of the reason why they did not try to shoehorn that in to that scene with Welf as he's making Kazuki is because it just might have seemed awkward if they were just to stick those things in. So not as much as a knock on season 4 as it is on season 2 for not including that stuff to begin with. And then the Colosseum episode, like I've talked about it enough. I thought they didn't do too great a job when it came to like the overall tension of the scene, because again, it kind of looked ridiculous to me when Belle and Ryu are standing with that cloth on, and it's not even like over them completely, and the Loop Garo is right in front of them and apparently cannot see them. Like that image is forever burned into my mind as being like super awkward, and wondering why they adapted it that way to begin with. But yeah, I've talked about the Colosseum episode enough in that review video. Like it gets the job done. That's all I had to say about that. Like episode 20, talk about it a lot. Best episode of the entire series for me in terms of being an adaptation, and just from a production standpoint, like incredible voice work. They did everything they could to get as much screen time for the episode by skipping both the OP and ED. They got an insert song made for that, sung by Ryu. Like they put like everything they had into the episode, and that's why it impressed me so much, because I was not expecting that. And then again, really quickly, episode 21, great job with the moments between Belle and Ryu. And in episode 22, I thought they did great with how they adapted the Estrella Familia related portions of that episode. But yeah, guys, that was season 4. It's been an incredible journey. I feel like so much time has passed, and it kind of has, because it started in August, I believe. Then we had the one season break in between the first and second halves. So it's been a long time. It's been like what, 8? I can't even do math. 9 months, I guess. Been a long time. Again, I mentioned this in the cuts and changes video, but thank you guys so much for just keeping up with the channel and discussing DanMachi with me in the comments. Like, I love seeing that you guys were excited about the series as well. And it really helps when season 4 has just done a tremendous job in giving like light novel readers like goodwill or faith in JC staff again with how they've been adapting season 4, how it was adapted. Because man, seasons 2 and 3 kind of burned me out, because when I first covered season 2. Oh man, like it started kind of good, and then when I saw how they were rushing through War Game, like you could see my mood just turn south really quick for the rest of that season. And then I kind of carried some of that negative energy with me with season 3. And even though season 3 was a bit better in terms of an adaptation, it still was not as great as I wished it would be, because again, not enough episodes for it. The mobile game, DanMemo, the mobile game readapted Volume 11, which was adapted by the anime in season 3. They readapted that because like it just wasn't good enough, basically, I guess. They readapted Volume 11 in the mobile game because it just wasn't good enough in season 3, which is surreal to me. But here we are, season 4, a much better job. As for where we go after this in the series, we don't know yet. DanMachi is currently celebrating its 10th anniversary as a franchise, and they've made like various announcements across the months, and they have one more announcement that they have not made yet, and it's supposed to look like the 10th announcement for the 10th anniversary. And you would think the last announcement is going to be something like big, because it's the last one, and they still haven't mentioned it, which is weird, because I thought they would just announce what it was like at the finale, because that would make sense, I guess. But you would think if they're going to end the 10th announcement with something, it would be something that's anime related, maybe some kind of anime project. I'll talk more about what that could be in a future video, because this video is long enough already. But yeah, I'll be doing a discussion in a future video on where I think they could take the anime from here. Like season 5 is an obvious thing, but there are other things they could do, especially if the line of thought they have is they want to give the light novels a bit more space. Because if they started working on season 5 like right now, they would be caught up with the light novels pretty much, because the last novel that would make up season 5 released in Japan in January. So if they did like work on season 5 right away, as soon as season 5 ended, there would probably be like a 3-year wait until a next season after that. So they probably don't want that to happen, and maybe try to look at something else to animate if we're going to get another DanMachi animation project. But again, that's for a discussion in a future video. But again, guys, thank you so much for sticking around the channel, being with me over the course of like 9 months and keeping up with what I'm doing, and just being a viewer in general. Like, it's like making these videos is not like the easiest thing in the world and it takes up a lot of free time, because oh my goodness. Like, I'm like you guys, right? Like, I watch a lot of anime, play a lot of games. Like, I bought a lot of games that had come out over the course of like the last 9 months, and I really haven't been playing them because I've been working a lot on this stuff. So it's nice to have a break now, but I will continue to be making DanMachi videos, of course. But anyway, guys, those are my impressions on the final 2 episodes for season 4. It's been a great season overall. Can't wait to see if they're going to announce some other anime project next. But again, I'll be continuing to make DanMachi related content, so be sure to give this video a like and sub to the channel if you want to keep up with my content. Don't forget to follow me on my socials, and as always, this is Lauren, your guild advisor, signing out.